welcome back to another edition of Inquisition Update. My name's Tom Fress, and I'll be your host for the next hour. Thanks for tuning in, and it's my pleasure, as always, to be here. And now we will continue our reading and discussion of the book, The Papacy and the Civil Power. Remember, last time we were talking about that form of government under which the papacy rules supremely, that is, a hierarchical government, whereas the Pope is King of Kings and Lord of Lords, and the kings serve the Pope. That is, the governments of the world serve the Pope. There's no representative government, no representation of the people. The king answers to the Pope, and the Pope dictates to the king how to govern the people. And it must immediately strike my listeners that this is completely contrary to our form of government here in the United States, where the people are supposed to be the government, and the government is responsive to the people, held subordinate to the people, and the Pope doesn't even factor in. So you must understand that the Roman Catholic Church, or rather the Roman Catholic Church state, represents a state within a state, a fifth column of revolutionaries that, given an opportunity wherein they might succeed without suffering too much loss to the church, will take an attempt to overthrow this topsy-turvy Protestant form of government and to replace it with papal hierarchical government, as was common during the Middle Ages, the Dark Ages, when the Pope ruled supreme over the kings of the earth. Now, we talked a little bit about more of the details of how our government is subverted by Roman Catholics, and that is in oath-taking, particularly as it relates to the oaths taken by immigrants to this country, Roman Catholic immigrants particularly. And we've already seen in history how the Pope absolved the King of England of any obligation to adhere to his oath to maintain Magna Carta, that is, the rights of the people. He simply absolved him of his oath because it was an unlawful oath. Why was it unlawful? Because giving the people rule in government restricted the rights of the Pope to rule supremely without question. And therefore it was an illegal oath, and the king was absolved from obeying that oath. And so, again, in England, the Pope gained the supremacy. He ruled over the king, and the king ruled over the people. The people had no rights. Now, dealing more with the area of discussion of oaths, the author continues in the at the beginning of the last paragraph on page 566, if you're following along, page 566. It says, "The obligation of an oath is understood to arise out of the law authorizing it. Although it binds the conscience in a moral sense, in whatever form it may be taken, yet if not taken pursuant to law, its violation does not amount to perjury." Now, remember, the definition of perjury is violating a lawful oath or taking an unlawful oath. That is, according to the Roman Catholic Church. Now, an invalid law is universally held as no law at all, although it may possess the ordinary forms. Hence, if an oath is required by a law which is null and void on account of its violation of constitutional or fundamental principles, no legal consequences attach to its violation, the violator being left to settle the matter with his own conscience. Hence also, if our naturalization laws require allegiance to institutions which oppose the fundamental principles of Christianity as maintained by the papacy, and are therefore, in the opinion of the Pope, invalid, the papal hierarchy readily infer that the violation of this allegiance would involve no crime whatever, but on the contrary, would arise out of the obligation of duty to God and the Church. And hence again, if this violation be merely a matter of conscience, and the Pope possesses the power, as standing in the place of God Almighty on the earth, to dispense with all merely conscientious obligations, then a dispensation from him would place all Roman Catholic violators of the oath of allegiance right before God and the Church. To comprehend properly the results which might ensue from this mode of reasoning, it is necessary to inquire into the doctrines and teachings of the Roman Catholic Church in relation to oaths, their nature and obligation. The reader will remember the reference heretofore to a controversy carried on some years ago between the Right Reverend John England, Roman Catholic Bishop of Charleston, South Carolina, and Reverend Richard Fuller, a Baptist minister of Beaufort of the same state. Being afterward published in a book form under the auspices of Bishop England, it is proper to assume that what has been said is a just and fair exposition of the Church's doctrines. Among other accusations made against this Church by Mr. Fuller, this was a prominent one, which could not fail to arrest public attention and excite inquiry, that the Third Lateran Council, held in 1179 A.D., made not only falsehood, but perjury of virtue when practiced in behalf of the Church. So grave a charge as this greatly excited Bishop England, and drove him, after some ingenious equivocation, to an explanation of the doctrines which had been established by his Church. He endeavored at first to parry, with true hierarchical adroitness, the home thrusts of Mr. Fuller, but the latter was too able and learned a disputant to allow this, and the bishop was at last driven to a degree of particularity which, in all probability, he did not contemplate at the beginning of the controversy. His language should command the most serious attention. He said, quote, "Among Catholics, sir, perjury is the violation of a lawful oath, or the taking of an unlawful one. Thus, if we swear to declare the truth and do not declare it, it would be perjury. And should a man attempt to bind me by the form of an oath to declare a falsehood, I would be guilty of perjury in going through the form to tell a lie. But I am obliged to go against the words by which I appeared to be bound, because it is no oath, but a perjury. An oath cannot be a bond of iniquity. A conspirator who has sworn with his fellows to commit robbery or murder is not bound by his oath. In fact, it is no oath. To be an oath, it must have three qualities, viz., truth, judgment, and justice. The defect of either renders it no oath." Unquote. Here the distinctive principle is announced, that an unlawful oath cannot be taken without perjury, but if taken, he who takes it must go against it, because it is no oath in the opinion of the Roman Catholic Church. With this as his postulate, Bishop England proceeds to explain what the direct action of his Church has been upon this important subject. He quotes Canon 16 of the Third Lateran Council, which he calls the legislature of the Church, wherein this sentence is found, quote, "For they are not to be called oaths, but rather perjuries, which are in opposition to the welfare of the Church and the enactments of the Holy Fathers." Unquote. Then, addressing himself directly to Mr. Fuller, the bishop defends these principles as follows, quote, I need not inform you that the first obligation of every citizen is the law of God. The second is the constitution of his state. And as no form of oath could bind him to the violation of the divine law, so, except the constitution of his state should conflict with the divine law, no form of oath could bind him to violate that constitution. And should there be such a conflict, he is bound to the state in every other point except that in which the conflict exists. And his exemption in this instance arises from that sound maxim of legal interpretation that where two laws are irreconcilably in conflict, that the first or highest authority must prevail. These are the principles which I have been taught from Roman Catholic authors by Roman Catholic professors. They are the principles which I find recognized in all enactments and interpretations of the councils of the Roman Catholic Church, from the council at Jerusalem, held by the apostles, down to the present day, unquote. To make the matter so clear that no room for misapprehension should exist, he quotes from chapter 19 of the Roman Catholic Catechism the following questions and answers. Question: what else is commanded by the second commandment? Answer: to keep our lawful oaths and vows. Question: what is forbidden by this commandment? Answer: all false, rash, unjust, and unnecessary oaths. Also, cursing, swearing, blaspheming, and profane words. Question: is it ever lawful to swear? Answer: it is, when God's honor, or our own, or our neighbor's good, or necessary defense requires it. Question: what do you mean by an unjust oath? Answer: an oath injurious to God, to ourselves, or to our neighbor. Question: is a person obliged to keep an unjust oath? Answer: no. He sinned in taking it, and would sin also in keeping it. Question: is a person obliged to keep a lawful oath? Answer: yes, it would be perjury to break it. Question: what is perjury? Answer: the taking of a lawful oath or the taking of an unlawful one. Question: is perjury a great crime? Answer: it is a most grievous one. Unquote. And then, summing up his arguments and putting the doctrine in the most compact form, he says, quote, my argument, sir, would have been more fairly put in this way. Man's first duty is to observe the divine law, but the divine law requires that an oath shall bind when it is taken in truth, in judgment, and in justice, and that it shall not bind when either of these conditions is wanted. The divine law is paramount to every other law, constitution, tribunal, or authority. Therefore, no law, constitution, tribunal, or authority can allow a man to swear falsely, to swear in support of injustice, or to swear rashly, or injudiciously, or profanely. No tribunal, civil or ecclesiastical, can do what God himself could not do. He cannot do what is incompatible with his divine attributes. The sanctioning of perjury would be incompatible therewith, and therefore no tribunal could sanction it. Unquote. The language here employed by this distinguished prelate has the merit of simplicity and frankness, and it requires no critical analysis to understand its meaning. It lays down the following propositions as settled and established by the Roman Catholic Church. Number one, an unlawful oath cannot be taken without perjury. Number two, he who takes an unlawful oath is not obliged to observe it, but should go against it. Number three, an oath cannot be bound of iniquity, that is, in opposition to the divine law. Number four, to be a binding oath, it must have three qualities of truth, judgment, and justice. The absence of either renders it no oath. Number five, they are not oaths, but perjuries, which are in opposition to the welfare of the church and the enactments of the Holy Fathers. Number six, the first obligation of every citizen is the law of God. The second is the constitution of his state. Number seven, the obligation of a citizen to the constitution of his state is only binding when it does not conflict with the divine law. Number eight, the obligation of a citizen to the constitution of his state is not binding when it does conflict with the divine law. Number nine, the divine law is of higher authority than the law of the state and must always prevail when they come in conflict. Number 10, a person is not obliged to keep an unjust oath. He sinned in taking it and would sin also in keeping it. Number 11, an oath is not binding when it lacks the element of either justice, judgment, or truth. Number 12, no law, constitution, tribunal, or authority can bind a man to act unjustly. God cannot even do it. From this recapitulation, it will be seen that in order to determine upon the binding obligation of an oath, it is necessary in any given case to understand its character. If it is unlawful, it is not binding. To this, as an abstract proposition, there may be no special objection, but the difficulty lies in agreeing upon what is lawful and what unlawful. Let us give the doctrine a practical application as it is understood by those whose minds are trained in the papal polemic. Having separated the church from the state, as in the United States, and made the latter entirely independent of the former, we have provided in our national constitution that it and all the laws passed pursuant to it are, quote, the supreme law of the land, unquote, binding alike upon all citizens. In order, therefore, to decide whether the oath of naturalization, we're talking about immigration, to decide whether the oath of naturalization is or is not lawful, we look to the Constitution and the power it confers upon Congress as the legislative department of the government. By that instrument, it is provided that Congress shall have power, quote, to establish a uniform rule of naturalization, unquote, thus leaving in the legal or common mind no sort of doubt about the legality of the oath of naturalization under our laws. Hence, in view of our Constitution and laws, such an oath is both lawful and of binding obligation. But, according to Bishop England, the Roman Catholic Church does not reason in this way. It goes behind the Constitution in order to inquire whether it violates the divine law or not, whether it is just or unjust, whether or not it is in opposition to the welfare of the Church and the enactments of the Holy Fathers, whether it, the Constitution, is consistent or inconsistent with truth, and if it finds the Constitution lacking in any of these essential elements, whatever oath it shall authorize, looking to any of these ends, or in any way bearing upon them, is unlawful and not binding. recognizing no other form of government as consistent with the divine law, except that law which keeps the state and the church united, it, of course, measures all laws by the standard of the divine law, and regards as invalid and not binding all such as do not come up to that standard. It receives the divine law from itself, that is, from the Pope as God's only infallible representative upon the earth. And whatsoever constitution or law shall be opposed to its welfare is unlawful and must not be obeyed. It searches the enactments of the Holy Fathers for precedents by which to decide upon the character of all existing institutions, and whatsoever they shall not sanction and approve must fall before its supreme authority. Let us apply these principles and rules more particularly to the subject in hand, our naturalization laws. The oath of allegiance implies necessarily the obligation to support the government and maintain its principles. In direct and express terms, it requires the support of the Constitution as the fundamental law, and the oath in this form is taken by every naturalized citizen. How does the Roman Catholic Church, with the Pope as its expounder of the divine law, look at this oath? Taking up the Constitution, it finds the following principles of government distinctly and emphatically set forth: the separation of church and state, and the church subordinate to the state, and requiring to obey its laws. The people made the source of all laws and are of all political authority. The prohibition of any law respecting an establishment of religion or interfering with the free exercise thereof, and the freedom of speech and of the press fully secured. How does it regard these provisions? In every form in which it can authoritatively speak, and especially through the mouths of a multitude of its most illustrious popes, it has declared that the divine law requires the church and state to be united, and the state to be subordinated to the church, being required to obey its commands as the only mode of obeying God, that the people are incapable of self-government, and that it must declare what laws they shall or what they shall not obey, that the law of God commands, quote, an establishment of religion, unquote, with the Pope at its head, with sufficient power and authority to govern the world, that Christ established the Roman Catholic Church and founded it upon the Apostle Peter, making all other forms of religions or religious belief heretical and sinful, and therefore that the quote-unquote free exercise of religious belief is violative of the divine law, and that the freedom of speech and of the press are in opposition to the welfare of the church and tend to irreligion and infidelity by giving license to free discussion, by inviting the exercise of individual reason and judgment in the formation of religious faith, and by stimulating the people to revolution, which is against the law of God, because it is violative of the divine right of kings to govern mankind. You see where this is going with regard to the oaths of immigration? We've just listened to a description of how the Roman Catholic Church views the government of the United States. And as that view relates to the oaths taken by immigrants to this country. If they be Roman Catholic immigrants, their oath is not binding, because the law that authorizes that oath is an illegal law. The Constitution is an illegal document because it holds the state above the church, and it holds the people above the government. All of these things are injurious to the authority of the Pope, the divine right rule of the Pope. And therefore, the entire form of government and all of its laws are illegal, unjust, and are not to be obeyed. Not by Roman Catholics. And so you see what effect this has in the immigration, the massive immigration of Roman Catholics into this country. They all swore their oath of allegiance to the Constitution and the laws of this country with their fingers crossed behind their backs. And this we've all seen depicted in cartoons and comic strips of a little boy telling a little white lie with his fingers crossed behind his back. And this is where we get it. That is simply a caricature of this Roman Catholic doctrine. That you may swear an oath, though it be a sin to swear an oath in violation of the Roman Catholic Church, it is absolved by the papacy, and one may swear not an oath, but a perjury. One willingly, a Roman Catholic immigrant to this country, simply perjures himself when he takes an unlawful oath, a sinful oath according to the papacy. It is a sin to take it, and it is an even greater sin to obey it. So where does this put every Roman Catholic immigrant? An agent of a hostile foreign entity, the papacy. We are flooding into this country an entire fifth column of citizens whose first and foremost allegiance is to the Pope and to their church, which declares our Constitution null and void, and that though they must obey the laws of this country for a time because of expediency, there will come a time when the Roman Catholic Church will grow so powerful as to make an attempt to overthrow this government and to replace it with one that is subservient to the papacy. Do you see what consequence this has for this country? And look at what is developing in the United States of America and ask yourself, could this be Rome's hand? Is Rome behind the overthrow of our Constitution, where presidents who stand before the world, the cameras of the world, place their hand on the Bible and raise their right hand and swear an oath, or rather a perjury, an oath that is not binding, an oath that is illegal, and if obeyed, commits a sin against the Roman Catholic Church. Now, there was one time in American history when a devout Roman Catholic placed his hand on the Bible and swore falsely. His name was President John F. Kennedy. He was a devout Roman Catholic. But President Kennedy kept his oath and violated the papacy's divine right to rule this country. He said to the Protestants of this nation, yes, I'm Roman Catholic, but I'm first and foremost an American. And no pope is going to control my administration. And eventually he was killed. That is the consequence of a Roman Catholic not observing his oath to the Pope and putting in priority the oath to preserve, protect, and defend this illegal, immoral Constitution of the United States and Bill of Rights, so says the Pope. Now, I maintain for my listeners, you may argue if you please, but I maintain that every president since John F. Kennedy's assassination swore himself in knowing that he was perjuring himself and that has secretly allowed the papacy to rule his White House. That includes the current papal king, Barack Hussein Obama. Now you may say, but he's a Muslim, but he's a Muslim. You have to remember that the Pope doesn't give a hoot and holler what religion you profess as long as you obey him. Ecumenism has made it a possibility for one who outwardly practices Islam to swear oaths of allegiance to the Pope without perjuring himself. Yes, it includes even Barack Hussein Obama, who started out professing Christianity, did he not? Yes, he can be of any religion he wishes. Barack Hussein Obama is a spiritual mutt. He worships at the altar of any god, but he obeys the Pope. And that's why our Constitution is being gutted by this president, just as it was by every other president up to John F. Kennedy. Now, the author continues, he says, looking upon the foregoing provisions of the Constitution of the United States in light of these authoritative teachings, the Roman Catholic Church must of necessity regard each one of them as opposed to the divine law, the welfare of the Church, and the teachings of the Holy Fathers. Such is the logical result of its mode of reasoning. Hence, the Constitution of the United States, insofar as these principles are involved, is not binding upon the conscience of any who adhere to those doctrines of that church which are dictated by the papacy. Hence also, an oath to support these principles of the Constitution is perjury, and no oath at all, because it enjoins disobedience to the divine law as interpreted by the Pope. Hence again, our naturalization oath is not binding upon the supporter of papal infallibility, because it obliges him to support principles which are opposed to the teachings of the Pope and the Church, and which he is commanded to resist as the only mode of securing the favor of God. Yes, resisting the Constitution of the United States can be interpreted by a Roman Catholic in this country, a papist, as securing the favor of God. It's a salvific issue in the Roman Catholic Church. They must oppose the Constitution of the United States. And if that means just little by little whittling away at that Constitution for the eventual overthrow of that Constitution, that is a divine service to God. It's a salvific issue. And the Pope Pius IX and also the current Pope, Pope Benedict XVI, have reiterated that it is a salvific issue, because every Roman Catholic is commanded to use his occupation and his avocation to implement papal canon law. And not only that, but on pain of excommunication, which means that if they are excommunicated from the church, they are excommunicated from the only church on the earth wherein salvation is even obtainable, the one holy Roman Catholic and Apostolic Church. So as we evangelicals would call it, it is a salvific issue to the Roman Catholics. And it's a salvific issue to every Roman Catholic that immigrates to this country, whether he takes his oath seriously or not. Because the Pope binds his spirit. The Pope binds his soul. Having been baptized in the Roman Catholic Church, he is owned by the Roman Catholic Church, and the Pope may do with him as he pleases. Now, we've talked many, many times on this broadcast about other books that are written specifically addressing the dangers of hordes and hordes of Roman Catholics from Europe and Ireland flooding to this country during the 1800s and concentrating in the big cities, the big political power cities in this country, and what effect it had on the country. And it still goes on today. Roman Catholic Spanish Mexicans coming into this country as though there were no border between Mexico and the United States, and they find refuge in the Roman Catholic Church. The priests get them jobs, they get them exemptions from the law of this country, and they take their money and they ship it back to Mexico to support their families. And then the Roman Catholic Church says, but why can't they bring their families here? This is distressing to these people who have come to this country and are working and are model citizens. They ought to be allowed to bring their families. Now, what is the motivation behind the Roman Catholic priests defending the rights of these Spanish Roman Catholic Mexicans? Simply to Catholicize the United States of America, to add to the voting booths Roman Catholics who will vote according to the dictation of their priests. This is how the Roman Catholic Church has sought to overturn our electoral process and to tip the scales in favor of the Roman Catholic Church for the purpose of eventually overthrowing the Constitution and imposing a government in this country that is consistent with the canon laws of the Roman Catholic Church and the popes of Rome. That's how the system has always worked. And it's been written about voluminously. But it's hardly known among Christians today. And I maintain that if this was widely known among Protestants and Catholics alike, that a large portion of the Roman Catholic population of this country would rebel against their Pope and say, we enjoy the Protestant liberties of our country. We enjoy the protections of our Constitution and Bill of Rights. And we enjoy them more than we enjoy the tyranny of the papacy. And that they would renounce Roman Catholicism, at least in practice, and would help to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States that gives them rights, natural rights, common sense rights. And that's the purpose for reading this book, so that Catholics and Protestants alike will know the historic strategy of the Roman Catholic Church and what it bodes for this Protestant constitutional republic. Now, R.W. Thompson says, and still further, it is the inevitable consequence of these papal doctrines, as announced by Bishop England and involved in the recent dogma of papal infallibility, that not only these principles of our Constitution, but all other constitutions and laws which the Pope shall declare to be in opposition to the law of God, the welfare of the Roman Catholic Church, and the enactments of the Holy Fathers, must be resisted by all who hope for the approbation of the Roman Catholic Church and expect salvation in the world to come. So what we're talking about is a global overthrow of any government that doesn't subvert itself to the papacy. Every Roman Catholic, not just in this country, but in every country of the world, is to resist these republican forms of government. We're talking about a global overthrow, not just an overthrow of the legitimate government of this country, but globally. Now, what is happening? Certainly most of us comprehend that the laws protecting the rights of the citizens of this country are being overthrown. But if you take a look at what's going on around the world, you see this activity taking place everywhere. The papacy is orchestrating a global revolution against the Protestant forms of government that essentially put the Pope in his box, stripped him of his power, stripped him of his jurisdiction, and he says, by divine right, I'm going to reestablish myself as the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords, and I'm going to rule the world, which is my divine right. And the governments of the world are being subverted for that purpose. Now, it says, thus making all human institutions dependent upon the will of a single man, upon whomsoever shall, for the time being, be the king of Rome. Now that's as explicit as you can make it. R.W. Thompson is here prophesying out of just common sense, dead reckoning, what the ultimate result of all this will be. That the world will be ruled by a single man, the King of Rome. Now, it is altogether probable that Bishop England did not foresee the ultimate tendency of the doctrine he defended with so much learning and ability. For at the time of his controversy with Mr. Fuller, the doctrine of papal infallibility was not recognized as a part of the faith of the Roman Catholic Church, and its hierarchy in the United States had not become sufficiently bold to avow their support of it, or openly to assume, as they now do, a defense of the principles and the enormities of the Jesuits or the Ultramontanes of Europe. They were biding their time, waiting for the accumulation of such strength as would afford some promise of ultimate victory, and therefore spoke upon all the delicate subjects touching the papal power and prerogatives with suppressed voice and a bated breath. But there were observant eyes in Europe constantly watching the progress of events in the United States, for it has become almost a proverb that Jesuitism never sleeps. Those who possessed a vision keen enough to see that the American hierarchy were well versed in the law of obedience served a valuable purpose to the Pope by influencing him to advance his claims and pretensions, so as to educate the whole Roman Catholic world up to the position it now occupies. Books setting forth these claims and pretensions, some covertly, others openly, multiplied in every direction. Among the authors of these, none won more distinction than the Reverend J. Balmes, a Roman Catholic priest of Spain, who was the author of a work which exhibited great power, learning, and erudition, by which he designed to show that the world is far more indebted to Catholicity, as he calls it, than to Protestantism for its present advanced civilization. This work, originally in Spanish, was soon translated into French and then into English so that they might obtain a large circulation. It was published in the United States by the Roman Catholic publishing houses and was commended in the highest terms by the authorities of the Church. In the preface to the American edition, the author is spoken of as one who, quote, has supplied the age with a work which is particularly adapted to its wants and which must command a general attention in the United States, unquote. The Roman Catholic is especially referred to it as furnishing reasons why he should, quote, admire still more the glorious character of the faith which he professes, unquote, and the Protestant is kindly informed that, quote, it will open his eyes to the incompatibility of his principles with the happiness of mankind, unquote. This book was written in order to counteract the pernicious influence exerted among his countrymen by Guizot's lectures in European civilization, on European civilization, excuse me. But there were special objects designed to be accomplished by it, which were very distinctly and emphatically avowed. It is said, for example, that the Pope is the best guide of men in the path of liberty and progress. Now, let me just stop. What is meant by the Pope's use of the words together, liberty and progress? It was the Protestant Reformation that proclaimed liberty. It was the Protestant Reformation that gave us progress. So the Pope is plainly saying that the Pope is the best guide of men in the path of the Protestant Reformation. The Pope is the best guide of men in the Protestant faith. In other words, Protestants best serve God when they serve the Pope. And the only way they can serve the Pope is to renounce Protestantism and every form of government that came out of it. He says the Pope is the best guide of men in the path of liberty and progress, and that the present pontiff, Pope Pius IX, quote, shows a profound knowledge of the evils which afflict society, unquote. And what do you suppose those evils are? Protestant evils. That the Pope is not the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. Jesus Christ is. That the Roman Catholic Church is not the sole possessor of the Holy Spirit, but that the Holy Spirit resides in every believing Christian. That the Pope is not to be the king over secular affairs, civil affairs, but that men endued with a spirit of righteousness should pass the laws under which he should live. The Pope is out of the picture. He has no office. He's not needed any longer, as if he ever was. But the papacy will not tolerate that because he is the man of sin, the lawless one, the son of perdition, and he has a work to perform in the world, and that is to deceive God's people. That is his business. That is his prophetic role in the world. There is no reformation for the Roman Catholic Church. It is up to each of us, individually, possessors of the indwelling Holy Spirit, to reform ourselves. Be ye not conformed to this papal world, but be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind. And out of this came the overthrow of papal tyranny, Protestant Reformation, the return to the Scriptures, liberty, justice, human rights. Which one of us would ever suggest that we would willingly go back to the dark days of the medieval ages when the Pope had his boot heel on the necks of kings and princes and potentates, and the people were simply slaves to the church and the man who called himself the church, the Pope of Rome? He says, the Pope is the best guide of men in the path of liberty and progress, and that the present Pontiff Pius IX shows a profound knowledge of the evils which afflict society. It was manifestly intended to aid in laying the groundwork upon which the structure of papal infallibility was to be erected. All of it was in preparation for the eventual declaration at the Vatican Council I, the First Vatican Council in 1870, that it was going to become an official dogma of the Church, that you must believe on pain of excommunication and eternal damnation, that the Pope is, as it were, God on earth, infallible, omnipotent, omniscient, immutable, and that your very salvation depends on your obedience to him and his laws. And with that being believed by Roman Catholics, it was now their salvific duty to overthrow every government that opposed the Pope of Rome, the biblical and historical Antichrist. Yes, that's right. Antichrist has been with us all the time.